And I want to touch on real quick virtual reality, because that is something that you wrote a book on. It was very popular.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the possibilities for writers in virtual reality and where that whole industry is going to go?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you bring it up, because it really is a big part of my ecosystem right now. It's a new stream that's come in. And I've always sort of been interested in technology. I've been interested in cameras and post-production at various times. When virtual reality first started to rise into prominence this most recent time, I recognized that the language that we could tell stories with this medium was really going to be different than anything we had experienced before. Part of that is because for the last 120 years, we've been using the edges of a frame to tell an audience, here's what's important, here's what is not important. If it's outside the edges of the frame, don't worry about it. I will tell you as the storyteller what to pay attention to by centering it up somewhere near the center of the frame. I will show you what it is that I want you to see. With virtual reality, we've removed the edges of the frame, and we have put the audience in the role of the protagonist. But I would suggest to you that no technology has really taken off and succeeded on a mass level until we figured out how to tell a story with it. Film cameras, Thomas Edison, when he first developed the film camera, only used them for scientific purposes. He predicted the failure of using a film camera to tell stories with. Now, he was greatly wrong about that. But once we figured out how to tell stories with cameras, that technology takes off. Television takes off once we really figure out how to tell stories with it. Radio takes off when we figure out how to tell stories with it. Even, I would dare say, the internet really took off once we figured out how to share our stories with it. My mother has become a Facebook expert, and it's only because she wants to be able to share her stories and experience the stories of her grandchildren, right? So I am convinced that we haven't yet figured out how to tell good stories with virtual reality. It's sort of what the book that I wrote is about, but I'm convinced that the ability to give the audience agency within a story is something that's not going to go away. This is a whole different medium outside of video games, outside of film. And just like with those mediums, it took us time to develop a cinematic language. It's going to take some time with virtual reality to develop a cinematic language. This gives an opportunity for writers, however, to help craft this new storytelling medium in a way that's never been done before. There is a lot of money in tech that is being invested into trying to tell successful stories in virtual reality. So I would highly recommend that any writer who's looking to sort of expand their ecosystem start looking into VR as a medium to write for, because a lot of what you know about story will apply in this new medium, even as you figure out how to expand your storytelling abilities in a new cinematic language.
Would you agree with the statement that box that you were talking about, that we've been trained and most humans have been trained to look at, even back in the Greek stage, like it was whatever was on the stage, basically.
Yes.
When that box is now gone, is it a little overwhelming? Because I feel it's extremely overwhelming when I sit down with VR and I'm just like, oh my, it's just too much input, and I'm like, where do I go? It's like I'm not trained for it. And even, I mean, maybe the generation coming up, because they play video games in a kind of VR world where everything is all over the place. But at least for our generation and generations before, but even then, that's video game playing. That's not storytelling. Storytelling is still, storytelling needs a storyteller. And that storyteller is the one who's going to tell you the story. When it's so wide open, there is no, back to the very beginning of this conversation, there is no structure. It doesn't seem like it. Do you agree? Tell me, what do you think?
Well, I think it's more nuanced than that. And here's why. If you look back to the history of film, When film first began to be displayed in these big motion picture houses, there's a very famous old film clip of a cowboy pointing a gun directly at the screen and pulling the trigger. And it's a very famous story. Audiences jumping up and running out of the theaters because they felt exactly the way that you feel about virtual reality. They felt like, oh, it's too overwhelming. It's too much information. It's too real.
It was like when the train was coming in for the first time, people thought the train was going to run them over. Right.
Exactly. So in some sense, it is because we're an audience. You and I have grown up with this 2D medium, that we're not allowed much agency in. And so for us, it does feel overwhelming. However, I think as younger audiences that have been immersed in the sort of video game storytelling that a lot of older people find very overwhelming, I think it's something that younger audiences are going to grow into. However, let me say this as well. I think this is back where my narrative shards idea comes into play, that you don't necessarily have to have a 3-act structure in a VR experience. You may use elements that we know about character, or elements that we know about symbolism, or elements that we know about environmental storytelling in order to communicate a story where the audience is the protagonist. So again, do I think we've got it all figured out? No. But I think it also took us some time to figure out how to do it with cinema. We didn't get that right for a number of years. And think about how long it took the earliest, Moy Bridges' horse of running before we got to the point where we have, Marvel Endgame. I mean, that is a long, long way to go with storytelling. So I think we've got a long way to go, but I'm confident once we get rid of those big block headsets that people have to put on their heads, we probably won't even call it virtual reality anymore, but I think people are interested in being immersed in a story in ways that they never have been before. So I think it's clunky. I think we're not quite there with it. But the writers who figure out how to tell an immersive story now, in the same ways that immersive theater, theme parks, escape rooms have been succeeding with for a number of years, I think those storytellers will be at the forefront of this future of storytelling that we're just figuring out how to. We're babies. We're just figuring out how to stand right now. But one day we'll grow into it. We'll be able to walk. We'll be able to run. And we'll be able to really experience something like we've never experienced before, I believe.